Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Photographing Bear Behavior, Part 2, Mothers and Cubs, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Brad Josephs. Thanks for being here today, Brad. I'm going to hand things off to you.
Okay, hi guys. I know it's a distracting day, as many days are, especially Wednesdays, where it's either inauguration day or the Capitol's being stormed during my webinar time. But I really appreciate you guys that have tuned in and want to virtually travel a little bit from home. So I think this is my 23rd webinar or 22nd webinar that I've done since March, and I've done so many, and now I've done so many on bears, and so you'll probably seen some of these pictures before if you've watched a lot of those. But this is focusing less on biology, although I always talk about biology, because I believe that a biologist really is kind of a key to being an effective photographer, is understanding the animal. So there'll be some biology in here, but I'm going to be focused a little bit more on the photography aspects, settings, how we line up to get these certain images. And certainly, like, okay, let's just say I use kind of like Instagram. I put my pictures on Instagram, and I use that as a barometer of what people like the best. And maybe it's just my following tends to be more bear centric, but probably 90% of my most popular images that I've shared have been mothers with cubs, bears. People just love them. So I want to just help you guys kind of go through a little bit of the technical aspects and get excited about going out and taking pictures. Now, I don't want to discourage anybody that just wants to be point and shoot, enjoy the trip, and learn about the wildlife and just document and not that serious about it. But I always encourage folks to become more artistic with their photography, because I think it's a great hobby to get out, and it just encourages you more to learn a new skill. So the first thing, just a really quick, 101, if you understand this triangle, then your entire photography skills will be totally opened up. Your photography becomes more artistic instead of just documenting things. And so it's quite simple. So this triangle right here is anywhere inside this triangle, the image is going to be properly exposed. Here, 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 here. It's going to be a perfect mixture of lights and darks, and the picture's not going to be overexposed or underexposed. But it's up to you to figure out where in this triangle do you want to take that image. Do I want to have it? Do I want to go for a slower shutter speed? So okay, so first of all, ISO. This is it throws a lot of people off, but it's just like film speed. And the higher your ISO, the more light you're going to gather per unit of time. But with the downside being, you're going to get lower quality. And a lot of that is based on the quality of your camera. But as this ISO number goes up, your quality will degrade after a certain point, and it depends on the camera. But your shutter speed will also go up automatically. And so then down here's aperture. I'll talk about second, but right now shutter speed really is what makes a picture make or break. Is it going to be sharp? Is it going to be blurred from hand holding it? Is the animal going to be blurred that you didn't want to? Or do you want to slow the shutter speed down intentionally, such as this, where the speed priority or TV, my shutter speed is the most important thing for this picture. I got really bad light. I've got a cub running across. So I know that I want exactly 1/30th of a second, which is the optimal shutter speed. If I pan with the animal will be somewhat sharp, but the rest of the background will be blurred, and you get this kind of artistic showing of motion. So by understanding shutter speeds, that is one aspect of photography that's really so. And in this, what my main thing is, I want my image to be in this part of the triangle, and I can control that by lowering my ISO. And then also I understand that my aperture is going to get smaller as well to let in less light per unit of time, so that I can get the proper exposure at a slow shutter speed. And then you just practice and learn how to slowly, smoothly pan. So understanding, this is just like the bear teaching the cubs a little about aperture. So aperture is the first thing you need to understand. I mean, shutter speed's pretty easy. You just need to understand that, well, say, just one sec. With shutter speed, you need to understand how fast your subject's moving, how fast you need that picture to take that picture for it to be sharp. The aperture is a much more complicated, but once you understand aperture very well, everything becomes easy. Everything's easy after you understand aperture. And really, it's just how big the hole in your lens is going to open up to let light in. So it's going to directly affect shutter speed. When you have a big hole, it's going to let in a lot of light per unit of time, and so you're going to have a faster shutter speed. It only needs an X amount of light, whatever the camera determines. And if the hole's bigger, you don't have to leave it open as long. But the other thing that it controls is the depth of field. How big, how much distance, vertical kind of distance in between you and the subject is actually going to be in focus. Is it just going to be 1 inch, or is it going to be several feet, or is it going to be infinity? And understanding aperture, I think I was thinking about it today, and this is something that everybody needs to practice to understand their specific camera, their specific lens, because everyone's different. And the way I kind of equate it is, let's say, when you learn how to drive for the first time, and after you drive for years, you can look up ahead to an intersection and you know when to let off the gas and when to apply the brake. But every car is different. Some bigger one needs more time, and I mean the brakes are different now. I mean, is it a new car or is it a 1976 pickup truck? But that's just for something that takes practice, because every depth of field is going to be different based on your lens and also how far away the subject is. But it's very, very important for everybody, to show up on a photo trip to want to get the most out of their images, is to understand what aperture does on the depth of field and also the shutter speed. And so depth of field to me is extremely important. So when people shoot on program or auto, basically what they're telling themselves is, I don't care about depth of field. It doesn't matter. Well, in my opinion, depth of field really is what makes your picture artistic. So for instance, I wanted specifically to really highlight the nose in this image because the polar bear was very close. And what I wanted to do was have a good image when I'm doing bear biology talks to talk about the sense of smell of bears. So I wanted to shallow depth of field. I wanted to have everything less distracting, more blurred out. And I wanted to just show the nose. So when you are shooting a shallow depth of field, whatever it is, you're generally going to get away with it if you use focusing on the eyes. That's the most important thing. Now, this isn't a bear, but this is probably my best example. Is in any picture can be really cool, even a super shallow depth of field with if you focus just on the eyes. I'm about 4 inches away from this dog's nose, and I'm using a 16 to 35 2.8 at 2.8 to get a very shallow depth of field, and it's an artistic picture. It shows dimension and depth and distance. Anybody that understands photography realizes that I'm very up close to this dog, that I have achieved focus on the eyes, that I'm using a shallow depth of field. And the better the lens, generally the higher quality of the lens, the lower the aperture, which makes you let in more light and get faster shutter speeds, but also allows you to get this beautiful shallow depth of field. And the better the glass, the more professional the glass. Say, if you're going to get a Canon prime lens versus a super zoom Sigma, you're going to get better quality glass and you're going to pay for it, like sometimes 10 times more. But what it does is it makes this bokeh beautiful. And bokeh is the quality of blur. So the more you look at, I think a lot of times when I was learning how to photograph, I would just, like if I'm flying on an airplane, I would look at the airport magazines and say, which one of these pictures are they publishing and why? Why is that picture really cool? And it's these kind of things. It's the quality of the bokeh, it's their use of the depth of field and these kind of stuff. All right, but when you're photographing a family, it's a bit different, and you need to really consider your aperture and depth of field when you're doing a family, because you need to make a decision. If you've got a family like this family, what I want in this picture is the background isn't very exciting. There's nothing interesting in the background. The colors are pretty, but it will be distracting. So I want to blur it out as much as I can, but I also want to have all the family in focus, all 4 of those bears. So that's just me knowing, well, the bear is 30 feet in front of me. I've got this certain lens on. I'll achieve that at about an f7. And there's no way that I can teach everybody. You need, it's not like, okay, when you're pulling up to a stop sign, You don't go into your head and say, oh, let me mathematically determine when exactly I need to start putting the brakes on to have a smooth stop. You don't do that. You don't start doing equations in your head. The same thing with images. I mean, there are ways, charts and things like that, but it's just about practicing and knowing your gear and being able to, really get that whole family in focus when you want to. So, but when the animal's close up, what happens is you need to think about, do you want the whole face in focus? And again, like if you look at this one, I'm at f8, the bear's very close to me, this cub. And as long as his eyes are sharp, it's okay if the nose is mostly in focus or if the ears are out of focus. It's just really the eyes. And that shallow depth of field has blurred out all this distracting grass back here. So what I really like about, say, blurring things out in the background, even if it's something really cool like a cub, is it definitely shows that you're close. It shows that you have a quality lens, and it shows dimension. It's not a one-dimensional photo. So sometimes I like to have a shallow depth of field sort of stuff for a family. Okay, so that's just one thing. Now, composition, what's in the background? That's really good. That's one of my themes of all my photo talks. Anytime I'm guiding a trip, pay attention to what is going to be in the background of your image. Now, this is one of my favorite images from a long time ago. And if it was just the female standing in the water, it would just be one of 1,000 that I never look at or never present. But the fact that I've got this cub exactly the right time in here, that really makes the image for me. Now, it's a blurred out, but it makes up that background and it tells a story. It's mom fishing with her cub behind her, and yeah, so I really like that. And it's just about what's in the background makes up it's just as important as the subject in these images. Sometimes, in my opinion, more. So you have to, in order to control all these things, you must control your focus point, be on single point focus. Every camera, if suggest anybody's going to get a new camera, for me, a make or break deal would be I need to have a toggle switch on the back of the camera. My Canon 5D, 7D, my Sony A9, they all have this toggle switch that I operate with my thumb, and it's dedicated to moving this around. Because when you press down, if you're on totally auto settings, and when you're going to focus something, if you see a lot of dots kind of flickering around, well, that's basically your camera is trying to decide what it thinks you want in focus. Because it doesn't want you to have to think at all. It's trying to do all the work for you. And generally they're good, but one of the things the camera is going to do is focus on the thing in the front, because that's mostly usually what people want in focus. And had I been on, of course, it's still on autofocus, but as far as your focus point, if it's autofocus point selection, then I would have focused on this bear's butt. And that's not what I wanted here. I wanted the eagle in focus. So, and you got to control your focus point, because here, the camera would never know that I wanted exactly just this eye in focus. That's all I really care about. Everything else, I want it to be blurred out. It doesn't. How does it know? It doesn't know the difference between a leaf and a panda. So you need to be able to, have a single point focus that you control. Same thing here. It would have focused on this mom's back. And that might have been an interesting shot with the cubs blurred in the background. That's not personally what I wanted. Same thing here. I don't want the mom's butt in focus. I want to just focus right in on those eyes of that cub staring right at me. Composition, there's many things. And so I'm going to just go into photographing bear behaviors, but these are just kind of, and I will talk about all these aspects as I go through the images. So composition, you think about what makes a picture special. And one of the things about composition that's really interesting, and it's very easy to achieve when you have mothers and cubs, even a mother and 2 cubs or 3 cubs, is you can get, humans love to look at images where you have 3 of something. I don't know why. They love triangles. Our eyes love triangles. They love the number 3. So if you have 3 cubs, oh, you're golden. Also, perspective. Being on eye level is very, very important, even if you can get to below eye level. Now, a lot of times you're not in control of this. Now, when we're out photographing the bears, it's not like the whole group is running around to achieve these sort of things around this family of bears. The guide has to make a decision where we're going to stay, and then that guide will determine, oh, well, if we sit here and when that bear comes up and over, they're going to be above us, which is going to be a very, very beautiful, dramatic image based on the perspective. So in a place like Churchill, when the bears get close, we're up in vehicles because there's no way for us to just be down walking around on the ground. It just wouldn't be, it'd be too disruptive. People would have to be scaring the bears away from the people and using shotgun blasts. So what we do in Churchill is ethics for the wildlife is most important. It's more important than the quality of an image by far. So you cannot, love your images and what you want, your desire for a good image over the well-being of the animals. But if you're in Churchill and you are up in vehicles, you can use this eye-level perspective desire to decide where you're going to be and take advantage of certain things, like if the bears are going to be higher up on a little bit of a knoll, you're going to get a much better image than if you're shooting down on the bear. Okay, so those are kind of some of the basic aspects, just a few, of photography. And then I'm just going to go through some of the behaviors that you can photograph mothers and cubs and how I do it. So the mothers and cubs, it's great to document all the different aspects of their very complex lifestyle, such as traveling. When they're traveling, it's excellent to get the whole family. Now, one of the things that's very frustrating to get is when you have to get the whole family in there. If it's a mom and one cub, then you just want to get them. But if it's a mom and three, you really want to get all three cubs. And you need to wait for those moments where you have like equal separation between the cubs, instead of if they're walking up on top of each other, or if one cub's lagging behind. You can still get good stuff, but really pay attention. Oh, here they come, and they're running fast. You've got 2 or 3 seconds. Get the mom and all 3 cubs right there, and it'll be interesting. And so strategy on placing yourself to get a more interesting picture, again, goes back to the theme of what's in the background. Now remember, here we had this mom and cub that were walking in a pretty predictable pathway, and we had a vehicle and the mom didn't care about us. So what I looked at is, well, we're going to get an image of a mom and cub walking. So we've got to stop somewhere well up ahead of her and wait till she comes to us. Well, why don't we just go ahead and try to make the background more interesting, to make the picture more interesting. So when I told our driver, you see that Krumholtz spruce tree, that stunted spruce, something that's very iconic in the region, especially when it's in the background of this, frozen pond. It's going to be more interesting than if it's just brown grass. So we pulled up there and we waited 10 minutes until she finally walked by there, and we had a more interesting image because we're thinking again about composition and what's in the background. So just bears traveling. And, and I love to do polar bears with black and white because you really boost up that white. The image on white, again, I've mentioned this before, is it's going to try to underexpose your picture. So what you need to do, either in post-processing, now it's a lot easier, is to really kind of blow out those whites and even turn it into black and white, just to really, this is a very undistracting picture. I just took the sky and the snow and blew it out, darkened the blacks, so you get kind of an ethereal, dreamy image. Luckily, this bear, when you're photographing in Churchill, another thing, it's really important to use a big lens because that distance, so if the bear is below the vehicle and you're 20 feet out, there's no way you can avoid shooting down on the bear. But you're going to be able to take advantage of the times where that angle is decreased enough. If you shoot the bear 30, 40, 50 yards away with a large lens, you're not going to see that angle is going to be decreased as you go further out. So bigger lenses, bigger telephotos you'll be able to achieve some really awesome shots with polar bears in Churchill. Now, speaking of polar bear photography and big lenses, this is something that I've seen really ruin people's entire portfolios. It's vitally important that you have your lens, from the end of your lens to the subject, to the bear, it has to be the same temperature. So if I was standing behind him shooting over his shoulder, I could get the same image. But the problem is that it's warm in those vehicles and there's a different density of air. So if you ever have 60-degree air in between you, and then all of a sudden there's 0-degree air after the 60, and it's in between the lens and the subject, none of your pictures are going to get sharp. Every single one will look like it's out of focus. So really pay attention to that in places. You don't want to shoot through different temperature clades or whatever. So yeah, just a couple good shots. And again, here I'm using, I've got a side light because we're sitting down, the bear's going wherever it's going, but luckily the face is in focus. It's a little bit of rim light going on here, but more importantly, I also have beautiful background to make up the rest of the image. Now, this is a great story about with mothers and cubs. You have to be patient and you have to use whatever the guide knows. I mean, if you bother those bears, you're not going to get the images you want, but you're also hurting something. This female here has got a tremendous burden to survive and have her cubs survive. And she's got 3 mouths to feed. Plus she has to give up or put on enough fat for the whole winter and support the rest of those cubs' growth. So whatever you do, whatever you do or whatever your guide's doing, then the first and foremost always has to be, you cannot have any effect on their behavior. They've already got too much on their plate. It's not worth getting an image to become Instagram famous. You can't do that. And that is one way wildlife photography and social media can kill wildlife, is if you just get too wrapped up in getting your images. But so this family was very new out of the den, and I had seen her very shy. Everybody wanted, of course, to get up to the mom, the only mom and 3 spring cubs in the area, and they were just chomping at the bit to do it. But I realized that, you know, if you walked within 100 yards of her, she would just drift off and go the other way. So I mean, I think we settled down about, and I just kind of took a crapshoot of where she would finally want to go. Sat down 200 yards away and we waited for 40 minutes. And 40 minutes later, she kept looking over at us and we were sitting, and she decided we were okay. And I think, in my opinion, she realized that these cubs are very scared of the unknown, and she needs to get the cubs used to people, because people are going to be around and in an area like this. And she need that fear of people. If the cubs scatter when they don't need to scatter, it's bad. So I think that, oops, I think I may have, yeah. Anyway, so they came up, and we were the first group to get close, and we just sat still and we're low and quiet. And this mom decided it was going to bring them up and introduce. We were the group of people she decided to introduce her cubs to. And the most magical part about that is the cubs just cannot stop looking at you and checking you out. And when you do that, you know, oh, you're going to get incredible images if you just sit quiet and are very patient, and then you're very, very well rewarded. And I got some of the best images. I mean, and it was definitely well worth the wait and the patience. And it was a magical experience, one of the greatest experiences that I can remember that we had. And those cubs just cannot stop looking at us. Eventually, they're going to get, you know, used to people, and they don't care. You know, they got better things to do. But those first few times, and this is something that can only happen when you go out early in the season, like in June. So again, eye level, making the background beautiful, and being patient. And we waited for I think an hour for this bear to come up in front of us, and then it felt comfortable enough. It laid down. We waited another hour for it to wake up, and then when that did finally wake up and start walking back in front of us, we got some of the best pictures that I've ever gotten out there in 20-something years. Okay, other behaviors. That was traveling. Now standing, of course. There's a couple things with the standing bears. I mean, if you get standing mothers, standing cubs, it's going to be some of your best wildlife pictures that you've ever taken with the bear family. And a lot of it just is about being ready. And for me, this is actually in a specific little spot where there's a creek behind us, and there's a little patch of sedge meadow where the mothers and cubs love to graze. Because that creek behind us is kind of like a burglar alarm. I mean, it's in a ditch that's a lot lower than this meadow. So this mother can't see the creek, but it's down there, and no bear can sneak up on her without making noise in the water. So whenever a bear does come down, and I realize it is going to get in the water and make a splashing sound, I always say, guys, get ready. She's going to stand up, guaranteed. And if she's in the right spot, you're going to get a really cool image as that bear tries to get up and see what's crossing over the creek into her zone. So whether it's mothers, cubs, standing, and they do stand a lot, especially in places with tall grass, they can't see what's going on around them and they feel vulnerable. Okay, so now check this out. Now, one of the things that I tell my folks, if I believe that the female is going to stand up, if I see another bear coming, or I think that something's going to kind of surprise her, make her stand up, because they don't stand up unless they need to. One of the things I say is zoom out, get the whole family. Because imagine, this image is cool, but imagine if I was zoomed in too far and it was that, then I would have ruined it. So, you know, always got to zoom out. It's always better, especially now with the higher megapixel cameras, to zoom out, because the times where you will definitely ruin a shot is if you're zoomed in too far and you miss something like the top of the mom's head. This picture's worthless compared to this one. So it's a lot about instincts. Now here's an image that should have been great, but I think the bear was too close and I was zoomed out all the way. But you know, I've got some fireweed back there in the background. Mom's standing up. You know, it's pretty good. I got two cubs that are nuzzling each other, but I mean, the picture's not perfect because I cut the butt of this cub off. So that's a way to really ruin a picture. You not only need to get in the whole thing, you know, of that cub, you also need to have a little bit of separation between the edge of the image and the cub's rear end. And you just can't beat them when you get beautiful background, beautiful backdrop. Two bears staring at you with light in their eyes, and one of them standing up. Well, this is front light. This is the lights at our back. Oops. If you're with a guide, they're not going to let you do this unless that guide is got the wrong priorities. But if you're out photographing by yourself and you're as great as it is when the bears are looking at you, you cannot be the obnoxious person that's making noise. I mean, I will. That's the one time where I've had to threaten to remove people from trips where they want that cub to look at them, and so they make a really loud noise to kind of scare that cub into staring at them, and that's just not ethical. What we want to do is fade away into the background into where they don't even notice us anymore. Then that is when the bears trust you. They feel comfortable enough to be around, and you can get the rest of these behaviors. One of the best is nursing. So nursing it takes place only when the female is feeling very safe. And you know, and it's just, and there's certain sort of signals that, so the mom and cubs will go through the rest of these behaviors kind of in a clock schedule. You know, it's going to be nursing, then nap, and then they wake up and play, and then they probably travel. So one of the things is if they get really stressed out, but then all of a sudden they're in a safe spot, a lot of times the mom wants to nurture the cub and use it a way to nurse to get that cub's anxiety down. Or it's just she hasn't nursed in a while and the cub's hungry. So what happens is you'll start seeing these telltale behaviors. The cub will start making these noise, wah, 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 and that female is like, okay, I got to nurse this cub. I have to shut it up because it's going to alert other animals that there's a cub here making noise, and that's dangerous. So she wants to make that cub be quiet. She also wants to make the cub, you know, take care of the cub and give it food. That is your key to settle down, sit down, and if you're really lucky and you're doing it right, and that mother trusts you and your group that you're not a threat, and you're very lucky and you've done it the right way, and she'll actually choose in front of you to nurse. And it just doesn't get any better. So usually the nursing starts with her sitting up, making sure she's looking around a little bit, make sure it's totally safe. And if she's like, okay, now I can kind of zone out, because I can zone out for 2 or 3 minutes and make these cubs happy. She's feeling good. She's feeling comfortable, even though she's settled down right in front of us. And then you get the money shots. But once a bear begins to nurse, you cannot move, because even if she's not really as scared of you, if you stand up and start moving around or make loud noises and it distracts her, even if she was like, oh, it's just humans, a lot of times they'll just quit nursing. They'll lose that train of thought. So it's a very, very special, very delicate behavior that if you don't do things just right, you're going to mess their life up and you're not going to get the images that you want. But if you do it right, like I said, you can't get any better. Especially when the cub just takes a little look around and they got a little milk on their mouth, and you can see milk just dribbling out. That milk is 30% fat. It's incredible stuff. Versus 3% for human milk. So yeah, some of my favorite images are just, so we'll find a family of bears and we just we'll hang out with them as long as they want to hang out near us, and doesn't even matter. This is from a breeding center in China. In the wild, pandas only raise one cub at a time. But if you've got a really good mother, the panda keepers can switch the cubs out. And so she gets bonded to all three cubs, and then she can actually raise three cubs, which increases the productivity of, as the Chinese government is trying to build up the number of pandas and genetic diversity to save the species. So this is a very, very rare image, but not anything that is even possible in the wild at all. But anyway, it's cool. I figured I'd throw it in. Many times after nursing, if the scene is still safe and she's still comfortable, they would just go right into nap mode. And with a lot of animals, if animals take a nap, if I'm photographing a moose and it lays down to go to sleep, I mean, I don't know. I mean, but with a mom and cubs, it's the only animal that's just gonna really, really get you some of your favorite images ever during nap time. And nap time, if the scene is safe, it's not really gonna happen. Like, that's the thing about going early in the year before the salmon come in. You're gonna get much safer, less chaotic habitats. So when they're salmon fishing, a lot of times the bears will be fishing in front of you. But then when they're full, they disappear into the bushes for the nursing and the napping. But if you're out in these open meadows and things are more relaxed, that's when you're going to really get your best napping and nursing kind of images like this. And but one of the ways the main way bears cool themselves is they'll lay down. They don't have so much fur on their belly, so they'll lay down in something cool and wet and use a radiational cooling to cool themselves down, because they definitely get overheated, especially early in the season when they still got this gorgeous winter coat left over. And the patience pays off. Eventually the bears are going to get up, and when they do, and this is a backlight image where I'm exposing only for the highlights, and so that all I really get is the rim light, and you get these silhouettes that I absolutely love. And if you're, even get some breath in there and some bugs in the air. I can't tell you how many hours. I guided in Churchill for 13 or 14 years for polar bears. I can't tell you how many hours we've sat in front of a female polar bear with cubs. And it can be boring, and we could be missing other things. But I think that if the more photography-centered program, I think that the guide will be more encouraging the group to be comfortable with waiting there, because even though you may wait for 2 hours and all it is just a big, ball of polar bear fur, nothing to photograph, if you wait long enough, then they do wake up. Those are going to be some of my best polar bear images ever have been after waiting for an hour, sometimes even longer. When they finally get up, or cubs are pretty restless. I mean, they don't sit still for very long. They'll usually, even if that nap time isn't over, they're going to get up and look at each other. One of them's going to poke the other one, and they'll look over at something. Every once in a while, if it's a huge male polar bear, they can go to sleep and basically not move for 2 or 3 days this time of year. But the mothers are always going to be raising their heads, looking around, because they're vulnerable. They're scared that another bigger bear is going to come along and threaten them. And sometimes the cubs just, when nap time's over, they don't really want to stop. And yeah, here's an ending of a nap time, and a magical image where I've got lots of really cool stuff in the background, and I've got light at our backs, which is beautiful. So after nap time is over, sometimes they'll travel, but oftentimes the cubs have nursed and they've slept, and they're just full of energy again. They've recharged their batteries, and they're going to do something that's very important in their growing up in their life history, which is play. And playing is a way for them to learn how to use their body to eventually fight and defend themselves when they get older. So they've got this big instinct to play. And when they wake up, they're usually just in a goofy mood, and so you'll get these kind of images like this, or trying to get mom up. And if you've got 2 cubs or 3 cubs, they will definitely just be magnets. It's always playtime for between the cubs. So I guess it's, oh, and this is kind of neat here. If you look at this, this is a clam that is, it's basically squirting its, I think it knows that there's a bear up there walking around or some bears, and so it squirts its liquid out and closes up, and you can see that. But yeah, I mean, you get a couple cubs snuggling together. It doesn't get any better. One thing I like about this image here is I love it wet bear fur. It really adds to the texture of the bears. And if there's ever a stick around or anything like that, like if I see a family coming up and I'm going to decide where we're going to sit down and we're not going to move for a while, so I need to really think about the light angle, the perspective, how we can be on eye level, where is the bear going to go. But if it's a mom and cubs and I think she's coming into an area, if I see something like a stick, I'll definitely get, you know, a good distance from the stick, so that because I know that as soon as those cubs get that stick, it's going to be amazing. They just love to play with things. So it's just the little stuff that you can kind of predict in order to get some of these great images. This one is two cubs playing, and then I've got beautiful mountains, and then the mother in the background. This is the mother with the two cubs blurred out playing in the background. Tells a story. Oops. So when you've got a mother with two cubs or three cubs, the cubs will be playing with each other almost all the time. And you may never see the mother actually play with the cubs ever. You could spend days and days with her, and she doesn't need that play behavior that is necessary is being fulfilled amongst themselves. So why should she spend the energy doing it? However, if there's a mom and one cub, that playtime is all on her. So you're going to get those really amazing scenes where it's the mom and the cub playing together. So even though it's fantastic to have a mom and two cubs, which makes three, or you have three cubs, which makes three, having a mom and a single cub, it's got its benefits as well. So I remember there was one mother that I watched raise several litters over the years, and she'd always start out with 2 or 3 cubs, but then the next year she'd come back and she'd only have 1 left. There's this very high mortality with bear cubs. And when she had the 2 or 3 cubs, she'd spent 0 energy ever playing. Never got to see that happen. But both those 2 summers where she came back and she only had 1 left, same mother spent 25% of her free time playing with the cub, because she realized that cub needs a playmate. So another behavior is fishing, and I love this. This is actually the female that I was talking about just now, that has just this 1 cub now, but had 2 the year before. And I saw her with 2 litters. It's a famous bear in the area that I call Melissa. And she'd actually caught 2 silver salmon here. Can you believe that? 2 big, beautiful silver salmon at the same time. I've seen bears catch smaller spawned out fish 2 at once, very, 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 very rarely. That are easier to catch, like a little pink salmon that's kind of tired and has already spawned. But 2 ocean bright silvers, only leave it up to this female to get 2 at the same time. So she just froze, and the cub came up and was wondering what's going on, and the mom is just like, grab one. If I move, one of them's going to get away. There's 1 for each of us, and these are like 15-pound silver salmon right out of the ocean. But fishing's fantastic. So you can get these amazing, amazing scenes of so what is the female will always make sure that she eats enough. She's got to have the power and the nutrients in order to catch more fish, and she's also got to make milk. But after she eats a little bit, she will let those cubs go in and kind of fight her, gently fight her for the rest of their meal. Bears don't like to share. This mother needs to realize that, you know, if you're a bear, nothing other than when I nurse you, everything else in life doesn't come easy. So they have to go up and kind of, you know, fight for the mom for the fish. Again, this one is using the background to tell a story. So I've got a bear fishing, but what really made this image special was having the mom and cub in the background. or just running through, chasing after mom through the river in that one split second where you're ready, where that cub stands up and looks right back at you just for a split second. We shared these images yesterday, but a bear, mom's fishing, focused on fishing, and then you got the 3 cubs watching her. Again, using the background, telling a story about when the mom's got a fish and the cubs come up and it's meal time. And this is so, it's traumatic to watch sometimes, but it's necessary. I mean, these cubs have to follow mom around, and she's tearing up and down the river, and they can't get left behind. So you really admire these guys. These salmon are not easy to catch in this water. And the better the mother has trained the cubs, the better they'll do. I mean, if they start getting left behind and mom has to stop fishing, and where's the cubs? And you got to go look for them. You get 3 cubs that are really trained up well. They know how to follow mom. They know how to lay low, get together, look around, watch each other's back, let mom get the food. Those are the very successful moms and cubs. Whenever bears are fishing and they get wet, always be careful, because when they get out of the water, they'll do the spin, which can be a really amazing image. So this is about shutter speed. If I want to catch the droplets, yeah, you're going to have 1/1500th of a second, something like that. So if it's dark, like it was here, and I wanted to catch the spin, I need to make sure that my ISO is high enough to get that shutter speed that I want. And I actually have never gotten this image, and I should, I want to. But if you wait for it and you know what, you can slow it down to about 1/30th of a second, and that spin will be blurred because they do it so fast, which can be a really cool artistic slow exposure shot. I love that, just that one split second where she's making eye contact with me, but she's spinning so fast she's not actually looking at anything. And then you got all those behaviors, but it's also, if you can get away with it and you have the opportunity to go for those bear portraits, the cub portraits. Looking at the depth of field, making sure that the whole face is in focus if possible. So making sure your aperture is high enough. And if it's dark and you need to have a f8, you need to watch that shutter speed, because you're closing the hole down. So you got to watch the shutter speed. Oh, and I'm only shooting at 1/30th of a second. I'm hand holding it. I'm not going to be sharp. Make sure you boost your ISO up. Those portraits, where I've got the whole bear's head in focus, but I've also blurred out this very distracting gravelly background as much as possible. So it's just kind of getting that sweet spot. Again, just understanding your aperture. And that's because you understood it, because you read about it, and then you played with it in the backyard before you come on the trip. And you can make the most of these instances. And with Panda photography, again, it's these are enclosures, but they're beautiful enclosures, and we prefer the breeding centers that have beautiful sort of mountain country in the background, if possible. And my favorite thing, the really thing we target, is to go before or after feeding time, when the cubs are actually still in the trees. These cubs will always sleep in trees to feel safe. So they're up in a tree, they're super cute. And try, if you can, position yourself as high up so it's as eye level as possible. And then you pay special attention to the background. So make up a beautiful background with fall colors or flowery trees in the spring. This is okay. So oops, sorry. There's a like a redbud tree in the back here that adds some color. I've blurred it out, but it looks nice. These are fall colors. These are at Wolong Panda Base in the mountains. And again, some of the best images that I like the most from pandas are the cubs in the trees, if the background is natural and beautiful. Just a few more cub portraits, and we're coming to a close here. I want to have plenty of time for questions. Again, so when we're sitting down with the mom and cubs, it's not like everybody's shuffling around. You got to get what the bears give you. And it is the only time that a spring cub this young is going to feel comfortable coming up to you is if you don't move and they trust you enough. I see you get famous photographers that'll lead trips, and you look at their group, they don't get pictures like this. First of all, they don't want to sit, so they're all standing up with their huge tripods, and they're shuffling around, and they're moving around. Well, the mom and cubs never come close to them. So that's because of how the guide is behaving and how he's getting his group to behave. So there's a lot of this stuff is about discipline, and it's about putting the bears first. And when you put the bears first, then you will get rewarded. But if I could change this image, it's not like I'm going to move over 6 feet, because then the cub would look and I'm moving and it would back off and it wouldn't get this close to me. But it would be really nice if this other cub had shifted over and was right here in the corner. But again, I can't change that. You just you get what the bears give you. And it's just using discipline, putting the bears first and being ready, figuring out what you want to do with your aperture in order to get the depth of field you want. And you'll see none of these cubs are looking at me out of fear. If anything, they just think it's interesting that there's a group of strange creatures that mom says are totally fine to hang out with. Just ignore them. But they're definitely going to look at you. But a lot of times these eye contacts are very brief, because bears, when they really stare at something, bears try to avoid, really kind of direct eye contact. So they'll look at you, but not necessarily for very long. So you got to be quite ready for that stuff. And I think that's it. And here is just a shout out to Ann, our destination manager for Katmai, that's helped build our Katmai program up so well, and also Churchill. So I just wanted to say hi to her. And this was a time where we were doing everything. We had the light at our backs, and we had a mom and 2 cubs that we had waited for an hour to get up from a nap, and then finally they did, and we were enjoying playtime. And it's just when all the magic comes together, but also all the magic of the NatHab staff making these trips happen is just as important as anything a guide will do. So thank you, Ann, for Churchill and Katmai becoming amazing programs. If you want to see any more of my stuff, I have a blog for NatHab, alaskabearsandwolves.com, and I just write about all sorts of stuff. In fact, I did an article similar to my webinar today. And my Instagram is where I put my best pictures. So it's Brad Joseph's photos. And stick around, because as you guys are asking questions, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of pictures that I haven't shown yet that you might like. So go ahead, Kendall. Hopefully you're still there. I'm not talking to myself.
I am still here. Thank you, Brad. We've got a lot of good questions for you. And I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question for Brad, you can submit those in your control panel under the questions field. All right, we've got a lot of questions that pertain to the grizzlies and Katmai that you were showing. So we'll start with those. How long of a lens do you typically use? How far away are the bears from you in general?
They're going to be anywhere between, that's a very difficult question. It's as close as they want to come. And for some of the bears, if they choose to, they will walk within 15 feet of us, maybe sometimes even a little closer, before I tell them that's too close. Sometimes there'll be amazing things happening 200 yards away. So the bigger the lens, you'll do much better when the bears are far away. A lot of the images that I got was with a 70 to 200 lens. Okay. I used that for a long time. I think of the best all around, if you're going to take one lens on a bear trip, it's a 100 to 400. That you're able to zoom out, and if you're sometimes you're too limited with a fixed lens. This picture I'm showing here that was with my fixed 300 f4, and there were so many great opportunities, but my lens was fixed, which was great because it's a very sharp lens. But as soon as the bears got too close, I could never get the whole family in there, and I only got this one. So you're going to have a higher quality of picture with a fixed lens than a zoom, but you're gonna trade a lot of variability and capability with a fixed lens. I think 100 to 400 is your best. Now what I'm shooting more nowadays is the Sony 200 to 600, and that's what I've been able to get some of the really recent pictures that I've shown, the really up close stuff. So that's a very difficult question, but if I have to just give you a good answer, the 100 to 400 is probably best.
Great. And when you're out in Alaska, do you use a tripod or are you typically just handheld?
I'm out with these bears. Usually the light's good enough, and so I don't use a tripod. And I think that if you can get away with not using a tripod, you're gonna have a lot more flexibility. But a lot of people do use tripods. I personally don't. If I'm doing slow exposure stuff with like a blurred waterfall, or if I'm doing snow leopards and I've got my 600 and it's way far away, or the light's really low and I have to use a slow shutter speed in order to capture stuff, I will. But when I'm guiding these bear trips, I don't. I'm too busy helping my group. I can't afford to have a big tripod with me, so I just make use of what I got. So a lot of it depends on the lens you have. I mean, if you have a $12,000 or $13,000 600 lens, it's super heavy, you have to have a tripod. If you have a 100 to 400, it's pretty small, we're out during the day, there's no reason to, you're going to be missing shots trying to adjust the tripod when if your shutter speed is already 2,000th of a second because it's in the bright daylight, there's no reason to use a tripod.
Mm-hmm. So in general, when bears are playing, what shutter speed are you using?
That's a good question. I think anything with the playing depends on how hard and fast they're playing, but you're going to want to use about an 800th of a second at the minimum in order to make sure that you get all the motion captured. It doesn't have to be that fast at all if the bears are taking a nap. If the bears are fishing and they're going full speed and you've got water drops and things, you're going to want like a 1600th of a second or faster.
And there were a few people who were curious about whether the sound of the shutter disturbs the bears when you're photographing them.
Never did, not these bears. But I'm definitely glad that like my camera doesn't make any noise anymore. There's zero sound. Press a button and there's just it's a mirrorless camera and it makes no sound. And I'll tell you, like if you've got 8 people, I think it's just distracting for everybody. But it is what it is, and it's never been a problem really in the past. But when you get more and more people with silent cameras, it is pretty nice. But the bears get used to things very quickly, and they just whether it's an airplane that's flying in or whatever, it's like your cat sleeping on the couch and you got the TV going and it's loud TV, but they've tuned that out. It's like, that's not something I need to worry about. But it might hear a dog coming in the yard from 100 yards away. So they're just smart animals.
Okay. And when you're photographing the bears, are you shooting multiple images at a time?
I do. I mean, if it's going to be a scenic shot where it's one bear with the mountains in the back, I don't need to shoot 10 or 12 frames. But any kind of interaction or any time where they might be looking around, I shoot as fast as I can, because like I said, that one moment of eye contact, maybe a millisecond. And the faster you shoot the pictures, the better chance you're going to get that perfect moment. So yeah, when the bears are interacting, moving, fishing, definitely on my motor drive or my frame rate's going to be as fast as the camera will go.
Okay, going back to what you mentioned about sound when you're around the bears, are you able to talk softly when they're near, or should you remain silent?
Oh, we can talk softly. Yeah, I think when especially when the mother has deemed you no problem, she must know you well enough. She trusts you with her cubs. She knows that humans make little noises. I think that it's just things like when the bears are walking close, if I've got cubs that are still a bit shy, I will say stuff like, "No, nobody do Velcro. This is not a time you're going to be having to want to take a raincoat off. If you have to go into your camera bag, zip very slowly, like slow motions." But the normal kind of whispering and things like that generally doesn't do anything bad. But we do speak softly, but we don't have to be quiet. The bears already know we're there.
And do the bears and cubs in particular ever come up to you when you're sitting down, and how do you handle that situation?
They do. Again, we never approach. That's the great thing about Katmai is that there's a very limited number of people out there, and almost all of them are guided by experienced guides. So the bears truly trust us. and that we do have the freedom to sit somewhere as long as we don't approach the bear, usually within, say, 50 yards for a single bear or 100 yards for a mom and cubs. But once we get settled down, we don't have to move like we do in other places where you have to maintain that distance. And so the bears just forget about you. But yes, inevitably, when those cubs get their trust, they will also, their curiosity will overtake them and they will come up. And I generally just talk to them and just kind of, you know, clap my hands. No, that's too close. And so sometimes the bears will get really playful and it's not dangerous and the mother doesn't care. They're extremely smart. They see that if that bear is that cub's interfering in our personal space, that we're big on our personal space. We always respect the bear's personal space, but we also have our own that we don't allow. They learn. We don't allow. They can't come up and sniff us and touch us. So that's a boundary that the guide has to set down. It'd be not something that I would want you guys to do by yourself. But it's not dangerous, and yeah, you just have to tell that cub, like, I'm uncomfortable, stop. And then the mom, a lot of times, if that's a really obnoxious cub, she will call the cub off and say, leave him alone, quit doing that.
Interesting. Okay, there's
Yep.
someone who's watching who wants to do a bear photo trip, but is wondering if it's okay to just use their iPhone on a photo trip.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the picture quality isn't going to be the same, but you'll still be able to document beautiful scenes and shoot some videos if the bears are close. And yeah, it's definitely okay to use it. Absolutely. And then they've got iPhone telephoto lenses now. I haven't tried them yet, but yeah, whatever you're comfortable with.
Great.
But okay, the difference between a photo trip and a normal trip really is, I mean, so a guide only has a certain amount of time to talk about stuff through the trip, of material to cover. So guides don't talk constantly. So you have to, your guide will read the group and based on the program. And so I'm going to spend a lot more time talking about these kind of numbers and techniques that I don't spend time talking about when it's a non-photo trip, unless people ask me, and I will do a lot of personal attention with photographers, but I'm going to do less because if I talk too much, and this has happened to me, one trip I had 8 people, 7 all had their new cameras and they wanted to learn everything. They wanted me to explain all the basic stuff, and they just kept, and so I wanted to make everybody happy. Well, there was one gal that was didn't have a camera. That was a non-photo trip, and she didn't enjoy the trip as much because she said, well, if I wanted to listen to all those crazy numbers and all that stuff that she didn't care about, that's why she took a non-photo trip. And so she figured, like, wow, I really wish Brad had talked more about biology and less about that stuff, because it's stuff I don't care about. So, if you don't want to hear this stuff and you want to hear other things, more about history and stories and that kind of stuff, maybe a non-photo trip would be better. If you want it to be even more focused on heavy-duty technical talk, the new pro photo trips, which we did an introduction on yesterday in our webinar, probably be better for you.
Okay, great. And final question, there's a couple different areas they're asking about, but it's the same topic. When is the best time of year to see cubs? And they're asking about Churchill and Alaska.
For my trips on the Katmai coast, the cubs are going to be there the whole time. It's just, what do you want to see them doing? Do you want to see more snuggling and playing, much more relaxed, more napping and snuggle up kind of stuff, and or do you want to see the fishing behaviors, which you're going to have much less, because when we're watching fishing bears on the river, that's not really the place where mothers are going to take their cubs and do snuggle time and nursing. They go off into the bushes and hide because they want to be away from the other bears that are fishing. But when the bears just have meadows to graze in or clam flats, they're much more spread out. And so, I can go pick a family and we can hang out with them versus pick a spot on the river and hope a mom and cub comes down. So, the images you got of the cubs playing in the grass, that doesn't happen during fishing season to nearly the extent. So it depends on what you want. They're both awesome. In Churchill, every year is different. The whole season is, I don't think there's a difference where you can say, the third week of the season is better for mothers and cubs. Yeah, so it just depends on the random when a mother with cubs comes into the area, and if you're lucky enough to find her. So I don't think there's no way I can tell you about that with Churchill. It's just any time in the season.
Great. Thank you, Brad. Well, I appreciate all your adorable photos of mothers and cubs today. It's a wonderful break from what's been going on lately. I know today's an important day, but I thank you very much for being here, and I'm going to turn back over to you for closing comments.
Well, thank you guys. Seems like we had pretty good attendance today, despite all the other distracting, beautiful things that are going on in the world. So hopefully you guys learned some stuff and you enjoyed it, and hope to see you guys out there in the field sometime. And I'm going to be doing a webinar next Wednesday on images like the one I'm showing now, is really kind of how to maximize taking images of bears in their landscapes.
Great.
I think that's what I picked.
Yep, that is what you're doing. I look forward to it, Brad. Thanks again. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.